Now, there is a rumour going around that I am absolutely terrible at stealth games. Now, even though that rumour is totally true, that doesn't stop me from absolutely loving the Hitman series, as no other series really feels as rewarding when your perfect plan is executed flawlessly and you get that assassination, sometimes without a single person laying eyes on you. And I don't think many series can offer what Hitman does. And as somebody who's been playing Hitman for many years and killed, many people, I decided to question which is the best Hitman game out there. So today we are going to put that to the test as I play every single Hitman title that there is. Which are the games that stand out for the series for either the right or the wrong reasons, and how do they evolve over the nearly 25 years that they've been released? God, that makes me feel old, I don't like that. So folks, strap yourselves in as we go to dissect and discuss every single Hitman title, starting from the original back in 2000 all the way to the most modern release. Without further ado, let's play every single Hitman game ever. Let's begin. The start of our Hitman journey begins in the year 2000 with the release of the PC exclusive Hitman Codename 47. Now, I was actually really excited to play this one, as it's one of the few Hitman titles that I've never played before until this video. But first, a little bit of backstory. Now, for those of you that don't know, in Hitman you play as the now infamous Agent 47. Essentially, he is a super soldier clone made for hitting men with his iconic barcode tattoo and dapper attire. Agent 47 works for the International Contract Agency, or the ICA, and this is the organisation that provides 47s with targets through his handler Diana Burnwood. But that's pretty much all you need to know really. With this, 47 is sent to a wide variety of locations with the sole purpose of introducing his targets to God. Now, in terms of gameplay, there is actually a decent amount going on here. At the beginning of every mission you are given the expected information, who your target or targets may be, a small description of why they need taking off the board, and a map of the local area to help you plan the greatest assassination you can. With that, you then choose your loadout. Do you want to be silent and deadly with a knife, fiber wire and nothing else? Or are you more the sort to go in guns blazing with armor and Kevlar, hoping that your target dies in the crossfire? Which whichever loadout you choose decided, you are then immediately dropped into the level, and now the rest lies on you. Now, for the original Hitman, things start off quite easy, like in the first mission. Your target is meeting a rival gang leader at the park. We're advised to bring a sniper rifle in the mission briefing, and it's pretty obvious with all of the tall buildings what the game expects us to do. The second mission though introduces us to more of the base mechanics that would absolutely become staples for pretty much every title going forward. Firstly and most obviously is the ability to take care of NPCs that you find around the level. Now this really surprised me as the original Hitman doesn't have an incapacitate option. If you need somebody out of your way, the only way forward in this game is murder. So if you're the type like me that loves going for silent assassins by only killing your targets and remaining completely unseen, you're not really going to be able to do that in this game as much as you'd want, and that came as a small shock to me. The next mechanic, and probably the most iconic for the franchise, is the ability to take the clothes of the NPCs that you meet and use them to get the advantage on your target. These disguises are important for a whole collection of reasons. It might be so you can enter a restricted zone so you don't get shot on sight by the guards. Or like the second mission for example, where you have to plant a car bomb, if you take the driver's outfit beforehand, you can do so without anybody batting an eye, which is quite insane really, since it's pretty obvious that you're holding a bomb with malicious intent. But disguises can also unlock special interactions within the game as well, as in one of the missions you need to eliminate 2 officials in a meeting, and the best way to do that is to steal the clothes of a negotiator and work your way into the meeting yourself. There you can blast them away and make a clean getaway. Moments like this absolutely make Hitman for me. The idea of being so perfectly blended to your environment that you're only feet away from your target and they don't even realize that their death is imminent. I always find kills like this more appealing than pinging them from a distance with a sniper. I don't know if that makes me sound like a freak, but I love being up close and personal to my targets, and this is something the first game can do surprisingly well, as a lot of the missions have NPCs to talk to, and a lot of them will help you out in massive ways if you're smart about it and take the time to explore. However, don't think that it's going to be as easy as I've made out to be, as one of the things I realised very quickly after the tutorial levels is that the game is quite bloody hard. Now, Hitman has always been a trial and error game. You're never going to get perfection on your first go. It's by multiple resets and the discovery that you can actually start to plan out the perfect strategy for murder, and this game tests that more than most. Firstly, there are no mid-mission saves in the slightest. One wrong move and you could be starting from scratch. So you can't really be protective over your runs, as if you don't hide a body right or just get caught holding something that you shouldn't, the entire map will then just instantly turn on you and light you up in a hail of bullets. Now, as I said, going loud is something that you can do back, but honestly, considering it's Agent 47, he's extremely frail in this game, and it will only take seconds for you to die, so it's not really advised besides a couple of missions where it's really forced, like the Columbia missions, and these for me will always go down as the weakest in the roster, as Hitman isn't an action game to that degree. You're meant to be a sharp scalpel, not a gigantic sledgehammer. Now, when you die, you can technically try again and reload into the mission, but everybody in the location will still know you and be completely aggro towards you, so they'll just continue to shoot you on sight, so chances are you'll be restarting pretty much every time anyway. But also, Codename 47 gives you a surprising lack of information. You really have to go out of your way to figure out where the key items are, the targets, and the escape path, with some being really unforgiving, to the point that if you load into a map and don't know what you're doing and where to go immediately, chances are you'll miss that golden opportunity to smite them down cleanly. So it could be quite frustrating not knowing what you're doing wrong, or outright just getting lost with no clue on how to progress. It's also worth saying that in this game there are technically multiple ways to take care of your opponents, but it's obvious that there's only one really correct path that the game will force you to take anyway. So the freedom to do what you want isn't the best here, but it's not a problem, as remember, this is the first attempt at a game like this, and for what you get, honestly, I was happy. Don't get me wrong, the game is very dated by today's standards. Even the controls took me far too long to figure out. But the most important part of any game is, did I have fun? And yes, many times through, so this speaks volumes for a game that will soon be 25 years old. Christ, I hate that. It's not all bad news though, as the Hitman charm is also here in spades. Hitman has always been over the top with goofy characters, silly premises, and a lot of comedy hidden away, and this game is no different. I always feel like Agent 47 is the only person on the planet taking this seriously, as characters are almost caricatures, and I love that personally. Some of the dialogue, especially in this game, had me laughing quite a bit. Now, the voice acting itself isn't the best, of course, but it's funny.
Hello, sir. What can I do for you?
I need to use the bathroom.
Why, certainly, sir. Let me just get the key.
And I don't know why, but the thrilling action music over that just makes that bit the chef's kiss for me. But the game is full of little moments that give you a little chuckle, and I was amazed to see that the DNA of Hitman was so spot on from the get-go. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a ton of room for improvement here, but this isn't a bad game in the slightest, it's just dated. And if you enjoy a challenge or want to go back and give it a go yourself, I would totally recommend it. It is well worth playing, even if it's just the once. And even if you do have a walkthrough by your side like I did for many missions of this, admittedly. But there's nothing wrong with that. Overall though, the missions are pretty hit or miss to me. There are a collection of contracts that I feel are perfect for the game, like Traditions of the Trade and the intro missions with the Dragon Gangs. They perfectly portray the feeling of infiltrating the area to make it work for you. But there are also a lot of missions that just don't sit right with me personally. Again, I have to mention the Columbia missions here, as they just become generic shooters, and that isn't something that this game does well, and they are easily the weakest components of the entire thing to me. In terms of story though, there is one here, albeit a slightly small one. To start with, it seems that all of your assignments are random, but throughout your journey you realise things might be more related than you think, and again, it's 47's job to figure out what's going wrong, which I also quite enjoyed, as it was as good as it can be for the first time in my opinion. It's also worth noting that the levels designs for this game are actually really good, from the streets of Hong Kong to beautiful resort lodges and hotels. There really is a wide array of locations here, and all of them are visually great and full of things that give them life. And that really helps as well, since the locations are another really important aspect to this series. It was nice to feel like the world I was walking through was real and lived in, which just tied everything together wonderfully. So on the whole, a really strong start for the Hitman series. I enjoyed this game a lot more than I thought I would, even with its increased difficulty and lack of handholding in the slightest. It also gets a lot of the fundamentals right, so moving forward they get to refine it even more and craft an even better Hitman experience. Again, I would happily recommend this to anybody, but it is without a doubt and maybe obviously the most dated Hitman experience a player can have, but it is well worth the trip in my opinion. So of course, as you would expect, Hitman is going to go into the #1 spot. It's the only game we've covered so far. However, IO knew that they were onto something really special with this game, so they got to work on the sequel, and thankfully it would only take 2 years for us to get our hands on it. In October of 2002, the world was blessed with Hitman II Silent Assassin. Wow, that's a lot of twos. But from the get-go, IO Interactive were keen to show off all of the changes and improvements to the formula. So, let's get straight into it. To begin with, the story is already a touch more dynamic and obvious. It starts with Agent 47 living his best life in a church. He's thrown the assassin's life away for humble tomato picking. However, once his only friend and priest of the church gets kidnapped, it forces him out of his retirement and straight back into the hands of the ICA. The church itself is also the first brand new change, now acting like a hub for all of Agent 47's journeys. Here you can practice with gear, see your entire loadouts and plan well for the missions ahead. But with that, we are thrown straight into the first mission yet again, and already things are noticeably different. Firstly, the opportunities of attack. Gone are the days where the kill is almost on a preset path. Now you, the player, can judge the best method of attack from a variety of options, and honestly, the first level does a great job of setting this up. From the intro cutscene, you are shown a multitude of ways into the complex. You can simply stroll through the gate as a flower delivery person, through the back entrance as a food delivery person, you can knock out a guard taking a leak, allowing you access to the entire house where your target is located, or if you continue exploring, you may find a sniper rifle in order to take him out from afar. Already a significant improvement over the last game, and Hitman 2 does become the first game where making your own plans of execution falls into place. And bear in mind that this is just the first mission, so we're already off to a great start, as the methods that they've implemented all work wonderfully, and give the missions more replay value to see if you can try another way, or even try to be quicker than your last attempt, something that I do often. Now, unlike before, when you start a mission, you will not be given a series of slides explaining who to kill and why. Now, cutscenes and Diana become a lot more prevalent, with cinematic intros to every single level explaining who to kill and why. And this is also a wonderful change to me, as it just keeps the action going and sets up the levels much better than before. But what about the mechanics? How is the feeling of Hitman 2 compared to the last? And folks, I don't think you need me to tell you that pretty much everything has been changed for the better. Firstly, we finally have mid-mission saves. This to me was the best improvement, and my lord did finally having this feel good, as even though I still had to be cautious, now one mistake 30 minutes in doesn't result in all of that time being for nothing. Now you are only given a select few depending on the difficulty that you play, so you still have to be sparing and cautious with them, but yeah, nobody's going to complain about this. In regards to taking out NPCs, it's pretty much just as good as before, with the classic fiber wire attacks returning. However, again, this time around, you now have access to incapacitating NPCs instead of being forced to kill them outright for their things, which is an improvement on paper. However, there are a couple of slight negatives with this as well. Firstly, the animation to use anesthetic to knock somebody out takes an ungodly amount of time. It's realistic, don't get me wrong, but for a game, it really over-eggs the pudding for me. Now, this wouldn't be too bad on paper, but the next problem is that people don't stay unconscious, meaning you could be near the end of a level and all of a sudden every single guard in the place will immediately open fire on you because the bloke you knocked out at the start woke up and told everybody on you. And for some bizarre reason, once they have been informed, every single hostile on the map will immediately sprint to your location. So it's definitely not a perfect system either, but without question worth the inclusion. It's also worth noting that lockpicking and looking through keyholes has also been added to 47's repertoire, and they both serve well and are worthy additions. Thankfully as well, this time around, Agent 47 doesn't have the density of glass. Now, don't get me wrong, he's not immortal, but you can definitely take a little bit more of a punishment than you could in the last game, which was always handy, as if things do turn south, it's great to be able to think your way out of the problem instead of just getting shot twice and calling it a day. It's not what you want to do realistically, but again, it's just better than before to me. However, this time around, a completely new addition though is the ranking system. Now, after completing a contract, the game will tell you a few choice words with how it went, from a murdering machine made of chaos to the coveted Silent Assassin, as trying to get Silent Assassin on every map is a big part of the Hitman experience for me, as it proves you are a lethal ghost, only killing the targets and getting away without a trace. It is so rewarding on multiple levels, as it feels fantastic as I said, but by getting that infamous Silent Assassin rating, you can also unlock more tools and weapons to use in the missions, which again is a wonderful reward, as getting Silent Assassin definitely requires the most patience and the most planning, so it just makes it hit that much harder when you finally get it. Don't get me wrong, it is tricky to get, and on some maps like the Japanese mountains it can seem impossible, but it's just another great addition, adding replayability and a sense of accomplishment when you do. It's also worth saying that the UI and the inventory system have also had a complete rework as well, and most of it is fantastic. The map now shows enemy movement in real time, as well as highlighting important parts on the map for 47 to explore. Whether it being a free disguise, an important item or such, it just helps give the player vital information without having to hold your hand all the way through. Another one of the biggest additions to Silent Assassin though is the suspicion meter. That now lets you know how close you are to enemies seeing through your disguises. Now, this meter is a great addition, or it would be if it really worked as intended. Honestly, it feels completely random if guards can see through your disguise or not, as sometimes they will immediately open fire on you without you knowing why in the slightest, or they will be the most blind NPCs in history and you can literally get away with murder. So it's a great system on paper, but poorly implemented here in my opinion. Oh, and the worst part to me as well is that running is now a murderable offense. If you dare take up as much as a hint of speed walking around enemies, most of the time they will just immediately gun you down without a second thought, and they'll spit on your corpse for the offense. This was hilariously frustrating to me, as 47 walks so damn slow, and some of the levels are absolutely huge. So yeah, I think this ticked me off more than most. For the story and the missions of the game, I'm so glad to say that things have been improved more across the board. The locations you visit are just as pretty and varied as ever, from the snowy cliffs of Japan to incredible skyscrapers and Middle Eastern deserts. All of the maps look and feel fantastic. The missions themselves are also a big improvement to me over what came before. This time, thankfully, there is always a stealth option besides the previously mentioned Japanese mountain missions. You technically can stealth these, but they are easily the worst to do so, and easily the worst in the roster. So I'm also glad to report that missions on the whole are fantastic this time around. It's also worth saying that the music this time is also phenomenal. Now, it was absolutely fine in the previous game, but here there's another significant step up, as so many tracks during this game are incredible to listen to, and definitely add to the entire experience that Hitman brings. And music like this would become infamous with the Hitman games as well, so another great feather in the cap for the game. Hitman 2 is an absolute masterpiece, there is no denying it. Sure, there are still several spots for improvements, and it is still a little bit rough around the edges, but the formula here is damn near perfect, and pretty much every change has been for the better. It truly feels like you are in charge of the path that you take, and to me there is nothing better than going for that Silent Assassin ranking, taking an hour to learn the route and praying that the plan works, because if it does, to me it is one of the most satisfying things in gaming in general. It's kind of obvious, but of course Hitman 2 Silent Assassin will be taking the #1 spot. It is genuinely a masterpiece through and through, even by today's standards. IO knew that they struck gold with this latest release, as with a console launch as well, it reached popularities that the original PC exclusive just could not match. So now there were more eyes on this series than ever before, all wondering what the next adventure would be, and it wouldn't be long until it was delivered. Now, in the grand scheme of Hitman games, I honestly had kind of forgotten about contracts, and again, it was only thanks to making this video that my memory was jogged on its existence. But you'll soon come to learn that I would absolutely regret not remembering this title, as it seems to just deliver another great dose of Hitman-y goodness. So, Let's get into it. Hitman Contracts immediately flips the script on the player by showing Agent 47 in great danger. He has just been critically wounded by a hit gone wrong, and when we see him, he is arriving in a disgusting hotel, barely clinging onto life. This already hooked me as an opening. Seeing Agent 47 in stress and on the verge of losing was a really interesting take on the story that not many would have expected, but sets up the new darker tone of the game wonderfully as well. And that is how the entire game is framed. The missions we play are previous hits that we experience when Agent 47 passes out in the real world. A really clever notion to me. So immediately I was already very interested in seeing where this went. And also the transitions into the levels were just so clean. Gameplay wise, honestly there isn't that many changes this time around, as the previous formula worked wonderfully. It just needed a little bit of shaping. So that's exactly what they delivered us. Let's get into it. Firstly is the HUD. Once again it has been refined quite a bit and improved well in my opinion, making it sleeker, easier to control, and including a new weapon wheel, which also makes it much easier to navigate this time around. It also gives me great pleasure to say that the NPC behaviour has also been refined heavily, and now is much more forgiving than in either of the previous titles. NPCs won't really see through your disguise as easily if you're just walking around, and the only real way to trigger them is to get right in their faces or be caught with something you shouldn't have or in a place you shouldn't be, which to me just makes complete sense. When I got caught in Contracts, I had less excuse to scream, "What the hell did I do?" like I did with previous titles, as here it's kind of obvious when you mess up. Well, for the most part. It's also worth saying that you can finally run around people without it being an invitation to be shot in the head, which is something I'm never going to complain about, as it was wild to me that Hitman 2 is the only game in the entire series that punished you for running. Even the first game didn't. So another great improvement to me this time around as well. That's not all that's been changed as well, as there are a few tweaks across the board that just make sense. For example, 47's running and sneaking movement speed have also been increased, which is a wonderful addition as well. The map now also tells you the difference between alive and dead NPCs, which can save you some confusion, and the anesthetic has been replaced by a syringe, which makes the animation of knocking somebody out so much faster than before, even though they do still wake up after about 10 minutes, which I really didn't care for, but it's still a better change. When it comes to the mission themselves though, this is where the game gets a touch divisive, depending on who you ask, as there are 12 total missions in Hitman Contracts, 6 brand new maps and targets, and 6 brought back from the original game. This is the sole reason why some people view Contracts to be more of a DLC than a fully fledged game, but I don't know if I can 100% agree with that, but I'll explain in a minute. To start with, the 6 new maps are honestly fantastic and some of the most fun I've had in the missions so far. The Meat King Party, Beldingford Manor were just fantastic, and I think the Meat King Party might be my favourite level so far. These are just more returns to form in my opinion. The stages are beautiful, even though the tone is a lot darker this time, the premises are fun, and there are many paths for the player to take, which work perfectly for me. With the remade maps, we have the classics like Traditions of the Trade, the Wang Fu restaurant, and Kowloon Triads missions as just a few examples. But the thing is, these entire missions were remade from the ground up. There were no reused assets, and most of these missions have different layouts and options, meaning that now there is more to do here than you ever would have done originally playing them in the first game. I don't mind these additions in the slightest. If anything, I think it just gives the player another chance to relive some of the better older missions in a new light, as if they've just been created for the first time. Now, I can understand people being a little bit upset by the fact that half of the game is reused missions, but I truly see this as a genius step, and honestly it works perfectly in the framing of the story in the game as a whole, as since we're looking over flashback contracts, it totally would make sense for previous missions to return here as well. Also bearing in mind that many players wouldn't have played these missions before due to the original being a PC exclusive, so it just introduces more players to the highlights of the previous games without needing to go back and play them outright. One of the things that I absolutely adored about this game though was the connection to Passed Out 47. When he's in the hotel, it's dark, it's raining, it's miserable and gloomy, so all of the missions have incorporated that into the gameplay as well. I loved that attention to detail, as it's clear that the real world is bleeding into 47's dreams, and I thought it was a very nice touch. But speaking of tone, I mentioned earlier that this game is a lot darker than previous titles, and I mean this figuratively and literally literally. The insane bright colour palettes have been swapped with depressing and drab, but somehow this game is just as beautiful as before. Even more so, as with better cinematics there are some absolutely beautiful shots in this title, like finding the strung up body in the meat locker. Cinema. Absolutely beautiful cinema. On the whole though, there isn't actually too much more to talk about here on Contracts. To me, it is absolutely a worthy sequel that just refined and polished an already pretty impressive game, and it delivers a new type of Hitman experience while staying true to what came before. Now I can understand people being a touch underwhelmed by this, but I cannot say I'm one of those people. Yes, I would have liked to have had a few more missions, but what we got again is just simply brilliant and another highlight of the series in my eyes. For me personally, Hitman Contracts is an absolutely fantastic title. However, personally on me as well, I think I still would play Hitman 2 over it on most days. So that means that Contracts is going to go into the number 2 spot and Hitman 2 still reigns supreme. Hitman Contracts was a title that was meant to be a snack to hold players until a new Hitman game was fully fleshed out and perfected. Also, if you haven't done so already and you are enjoying the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, turn the bell on because it helps me more than you could possibly imagine. So thank you in advance, back to the video. And fortunately, only 2 years later, the newest Hitman experience was ready to hit the shelves on a new series of consoles, with the devs promising that the definitive Hitman experience was finally here. Were they right? Well, to me, absolutely they were. We now arrive at my first ever Hitman game and the start of my personal Hitman obsession. As in May of 2006, Hitman Blood Money hit the shelves, and again IO were promising that this was just another improvement across the board. But it's been a while since I've last played this game, so does it actually hold up against my nostalgic memories? Well, let's find out. Now in Hitman Blood Money, the entire premise is framed through the eyes of a reporter and a mysterious wheelchair-bound man called Mr. Kane. Throughout the course of the game, Mr. Kane gives the reporter the scoop of the century by giving them information on 47's past and all of his previous contracts. And these flashback sections are of course the missions of the game. That's the simple premise of the story really. So let's get into the game itself. For now we're thrown into the stereotypical tutorial, and here we actually get to see a lot of the new mechanics and improvements that were introduced. The first and most surprising to me is the new upgrade menu. Now with the money of your completed contracts you can buy tech, tools and personal upgrades to Mr. 47. These range from lockpicking doors faster, having more health, weapon upgrades, and even unlocking interesting items like briefcases that can keep their snipery contents a secret from metal detectors. But onto the mechanics that we learned from the tutorial. Firstly, Agent 47 is now able to climb small obstacles, making movement and map traversal just that bit easier. We can now also throw items to distract guards and other NPCs, giving you another method of sneaking past without having to get deadly on everybody. Mr. 47 can now also dump body that he creates in containers and crates, allowing for quick cleanup and getaways, along with the new option to hide within closets, which again just adds another avenue of escape or gives you the perfect opportunity to pounce on an unsuspecting foe. It also appears that 47 has been training his fighting styles, as you can now just lamp your opponents or try to until they're unconscious, finally putting his chrome dome to use, with you also being able to steal weapons and turn them on the enemy mid-fight. And another new mechanic this time around is also being able to take a meat shield. But honestly, I can't say I used this one outside of the intro tutorial, so it's a neat idea, but in the long run not something that I really found myself relying on in the slightest. Finally as well folks, it gives me phenomenal joy to be able to say that knocking people out is finally a permanent state. God bless IO for this decision. But now knocked out bodies stay knocked out and will no longer cause a problem, which is nothing short of perfection. But that's pretty much the rundown on most of the new features at 47's disposal. So on the surface he is definitely the most deadly and cunning to date, but that's not all. When we finally get into the main missions, we're introduced to the new avenues of death, as well as the massive emphasis on the new accident kills. When the opportunity presents itself, you are now able to dispatch your foes and make it look like you had no involvement. Now, this system is a great addition to me, but most of the time, accident kills either devolve into pushing them off a ledge or squashing something on top of them. Now, there are some unique accident kills, of course, depending on the contract. You can challenge your target to a duel or blow up someone's cooking equipment as a couple of examples. But 90% of the time, if you're going for accident kills in this game, you'll just push somebody bully or squash them. Now that may sound like a negative, and whilst it can get a little mundane towards the end, the accident system is so worth being involved. As with the original Hitman, this is just the first draft, a new idea that needs some tweaking, but among other things it would become associated with the franchise. So it's amazing to finally see the first integration of that here, and I certainly had fun with it. The other massive new feature that was heavily talked about is the notoriety system. Now the entire game will change depending on how chaotic or quiet Agent 47 is within his contracts. If you are the silent ghost type, of course, nothing really happens. However, if you're the type to leave a mess and be sloppy, then your notoriety will go up, meaning that in future missions it will become that much harder, as enemies will already sort of recognize you and be that much quicker on turning hostile in your presence. The system is a really good idea in premise, however for me it has one major flaw that sort of makes it redundant, and the flaw is that making money is far too easy in this game. This matters because at the end of every level you have the opportunity to spend said money to bribe appropriate people and bring your notoriety down. With money being so easy to earn, it's totally possible to completely botch a job, become the most wanted man on the planet, and still earn enough to reduce it back down to zero with change to spare. So the mechanic gets muted under the fact that you can just buy your way out of the consequences, which I just think is a shame. This system could have been something really good, adding another interesting layer to the game, but unfortunately with the way that it was implemented here, it doesn't really add to much. Sure, if you spend all of your money on your notoriety, that means you'll have less for upgrades, but the game is still more than playable without them, so it just really doesn't add up to me. The notoriety also works its way into a cool little new addition as well with the newspapers. At the end of every level, you will be shown a newspaper headlining how it went for you. If you're, again, the silent ghost type, the article will be vague and mysterious, or if you go in guns blazing, the headlines will read of a maniac massacring the local populace. Not a bad system at all, and a fun way to be given stats if you read through. There are also a couple of smaller additions as well, with the new picture-in-picture moments that show you key times in the mission, whether it be your target's demise or a clue as to how to take them out. These are also worthy additions. And another really small tiny mechanic but I feel like is worth mentioning is the ability to drag opponents onto the top part of a lift, for another clean style of execution as well. Nothing to scream home about, but worth the inclusion all the same. Now let's talk about the missions. For Hitman Blood Money, again, these have some of my personal favourite missions in the entire series. The Opera House is fantastic, the medical spa place and the streets of Mardi Gras are easily some of the best, and the difference between this game and the last is actually quite insane. Firstly, there are more NPCs on the map than ever before, which adds a completely new life to the levels, but also makes it much more daring when you're trying to get away with things with 100 prying eyes on you. The suspicion meter and NPC behaviour has also been fine-tuned a hell of a lot more, and again is slightly more forgiving than the last title. For example, if you now enter a restricted zone, enemies will no longer shoot you on sight, but instead will warn you and give you the opportunity to leave, which is another great fine-tune in my eyes. However, the NPCs still aren't perfect, as sometimes this hilarious thing would happen where guards would try to shoot me, but in the process of trying to kill me for trespassing, they can kill nearly every NPC on the map. It is absolutely wild. Oh! Mate, you can't do that, you're gonna kill everybody! All the police have joined in too! This is a massacre! Like, all I did was trespass! All of these people are dying because I trespassed! Like, at what point am I no longer the problem to the people here? But the levels themselves have also improved massively in my eyes, and there are little to no bad missions in this game. The only one that I would say is a little bit long in the tooth is the casino one with 3 targets, as it takes about 10 minutes of waiting just for the targets to arrive, which was a touch slow. But all of the locations here are again varied and absolutely stunning, and the vibe, for lack of a better word, is immaculate to me. And to top it all off, the final mission is also fantastic, and sees you get revenge in your own surprising way. But I won't spoil it for you, don't worry. I will also say as a final note that as far as the soundtrack goes, it is another really amazing experience. However, by the end of the game, you will know Ave Marie word for word, so make of that what you will. On the whole, Hitman Blood Money is another incredible Hitman experience, full of new angles and paths to think of, amazing locations, and the replay value is also the best it's been. I was a little bit worried that Blood Money wouldn't hold up after all of this time. However, it really does, and it's just another Hitman game that I would absolutely definitely recommend to anybody willing to give it a go. So for me, yes, I will be putting Blood Money above Silent Assassin. Now, I think this game is an absolute masterpiece. Don't get me wrong, it's a little bit rough around the edges still, but I absolutely see it as the best Hitman experience so far. However, with IO finally getting so close to the perfect formula for the Hitman games, it's then surprising that we wouldn't get another title for a long and painful 6 years. But don't worry, after waiting so long for the sequel to Blood Money, it only makes sense that the next title delivers absolute perfection. Right? But before we get to that next game, we need to talk about Sniper Challenge really quick. Now yes, this is a touch weird, but I decided to make it its own little entry before talking about the main game, as this got its own box and everything. Now Hitman Sniper Challenge was a pre-order bonus for Hitman Absolution, and gave a fun sniping mission to hold fans over until the release of the next game. All it does is see Agent 47 sit on a rooftop, and you have to expertly take out your targets as best as you can. Honestly, this mission was a ton of fun to me. There are plenty of challenges and nice moments where multiple playthroughs are justified even with it only being a single level. The sniping feels clean to control and the graphics are good. Now, honestly, that's pretty much it, but I felt the need to include this as we're doing every Hitman game, so sod it, moving on to the next actual title. Okay, yes, we have finally arrived at one of the most infamous Hitman titles in the series. Absolution dropped in 2012 and was met with very mixed reviews, but me personally, I always really enjoyed it, even with its flaws. However, again, like Blood Money, it has been many years since I last ventured here, so let's see what I think about the most controversial entry. Now, before I even touch the game itself, I do want to quickly talk about the reasons why this game is the way it is, and honestly, the entire reason can be summed up in a single word: panic. At the time of Absolution's development, games like Gears of War, COD and Halo were the juggernauts of the industry, and IO basically didn't think that their style of game would really land in the current climate of gaming. So they tried to imitate the essence of these games to fit in, but unfortunately it didn't work at all. Halfway through development, feedback let the devs know that people hated this. So they tried to add some classic Hitman feelings, and that's why we've got such a weird blend of genres. They just didn't have confidence in their IP and kinda panicked, but onto the game itself. Hitman Absolution has so many changes across the entire board, so let's start with the story, as Absolution became the first title to truly focus on the narrative, instead of using a small story as a way to link missions. At the start of Absolution, Diana has gone rogue and has caused the death of several agents, so it's up to 47 to put Diana down. Whilst doing so, 47 also finds out that she's looking after a young girl called Abigail, who can restart the entire cloning process because her DNA is delicious. With Diana's dying breath, she asks 47 to look after Abigail, and that's where the story goes. 47 goes rogue himself, and our only priority is Abigail's safety. Honestly, a really interesting story, and I love the premise, as giving the emotionless bald warrior a character to look after could take the game in an interesting direction if done well, but unfortunately it's not. Agent 47 will spend most of the game not in fact dealing with the ICA or the repercussions of not only Diana going rogue, but 47 himself. You actually spend 90% of the game hunting a crazy redneck crime family. And no, I'm not joking. But throughout the entire game, most missions will involve this crime family or contracts designed to get closer to them. So we've already got a touch of wasted potential. It's also worth noting that the family themselves... Actually, no, scratch that. It's worth noting that every single character in this game is absolutely insane for no reason. And I'm not talking about in the sense that they're bad at crime, but literally every single member is the exact same sort as crazy, and it gets boring after about maybe 30 minutes. That is a hilarious shame, as the main baddie Blake Dexter is also voiced by the incredibly talented Keith Carradine, who played Special Agent Lundy in The Dexter Show, which is one of my favourite series of all time. Don't get me wrong, Blake Dexter is easily the best of the bunch, but it could have been so much more than the very occasional chuckle. The only real time the ICA actually show up is the infamous sexy nun section, that they made sure to plaster in pretty much every trailer and promotional piece for this, and this section sucked. If they had spent some time on these characters, I'm sure that it would have been great, but all we know is that they work for the ICA and want to kill us. Absolutely no clue. clue. But that is also a really weird theme in the game as well. Every single aspect is horny as hell, and I really mean that. Pretty much every cutscene will have a touch of smut in it some way or another, and it feels really odd and really forced. And bearing in mind, this is the same series where a slaughterhouse BDSM party didn't feel out of place. But enough of the story, it's time to get to the action. Now, the first thing to notice are gone the open landscapes for 47 to casually explore at his leisure. The game is insanely linear now, with most missions not even having a target at all. The entire game feels like the Japanese mountains or Columbia missions again, where your only real objective is to reach the exit or the entrance. Do that enough times and if you're lucky, there may be a target ahead soon. But when you finally do find a mission with a killable target in it, the game is significantly and instantly better. The open world areas like the Chinese market, the fighting pit and the strip club are honestly fantastic. And if the game was like this throughout, nobody would be complaining about Absolution at all. But unfortunately, they are so rare and come with another bit of an issue for me. They are hilariously easy to complete. I think the linear missions took me roughly 20 to 30 minutes to complete, but I completed some of these target missions within 5 to 10 minutes silently and with no witnesses. So even though they are the best part of Absolution, they are also unfortunately still a little bit underwhelming for me. However, I will also say that the accidents in this game are phenomenal. You truly do have incredible ways to kill your foes. It's just such a shame that it doesn't hit exactly the same as it did before. This time around, however, there are a collection of new mechanics, and some of them are honestly fantastic additions, and some are hilariously frustrating. So let's start with the good. Firstly, combat is the best it has ever been, and it's not even close. And that is in part to the cover system. Ripped straight from Gears of War, traversing the environment and controlling 47 has never been this clean. Movement is fantastic, and the instances where you do get into gun battles and combat, again, the game feels smooth and fluid, which is great. You can now also move across ledges, which is absolutely fine, but the reason why I mention this is for the hilarious moments when you can absolutely launch an NPC into the Shadow Realm. But more than that, you can also now knock out NPCs without the need of a sedative by either choking them or hitting them on the head with a heavy blunt object. Again, another great change. And speaking of throwing, the throwing system has also been improved greatly, as now it gives you an arch so you know exactly where your object will end up, as well as making it easier to use these items in combat, whether that be blunt or lethal. Blood Money also did have throwing lethal items to kill people, but it was so janky and hard to pull off it wasn't really worth talking about, whereas here, they absolutely got it right. The next and probably my favourite addition though would be the challenges that come with every mission. Now you are given a list of things to do within every single contract of the game, ranging from completing the level without being seen and only in your suit, to fun challenges and wacky premises designed for the player to squeeze the most out of every level. Absolution, without question, is the greatest Hitman for replayability, as there is a surprising amount to do and it can be really fun going out of your way to see what's available in every section. Now, earlier I kind of dumped on the fact that the story's a bit of wasted potential. However, what I will say is that you can see that the devs had fun with this game, and that comes through quite well, which I feel like's important to mention. Hitting gents with ice cream trucks, finding quite enjoyable Easter eggs throughout make for really fun moments that I think would be a disservice to the game if I didn't mention. The visuals also, of course, are the best they've ever been. As far as the dark aesthetic and amount of polish everything has, it really is the most beautiful a Hitman game has been so far, so at least it's enjoyable from a visual standpoint to go through as well. Unfortunately, that's probably all the good I can say about this game, and the rest can be confusing to outright infuriating. The biggest negative for me are the changes to the disguise system and the inclusion of Instinct. Now when 47 chooses a disguise, you have to be very careful, as every single character that is also wearing that outfit will now immediately be suspicious of 47 and follow him around demanding to know where he's from. I despise this. I feel like there was such a clever way to implement this somewhere, but what we get is not even close to that. For the most part, I felt like disguises were totally pointless other than the few one-of-a-kinds that nobody can see through. At most, it buys you an extra second. So to balance it out, IO added something called the Instinct Meter, which allows 47 to deplete the bar and momentarily blend in. The idea is that you get an outfit and every character that might get in your way you can instinct past and carry on, with Instinct also giving 47 outright superpowers and allowing him to see enemies and their movement through walls. The only problem with that is that Instinct isn't even close to reliable, and all 47 does to blend in is slightly put his head down and rub his bald a bit. Now, answer me this, how is that a depletable commodity? How can 47 run run out of the ability to look down and rub his head. Infuriating. This was also just on normal difficulty. The higher levels mean that instinct gets used up faster and is harder to restore, which then makes the over-reliance of this feature absolutely miserable. As I said, there was clearly a clever way to implement this, but the way we got was appalling in my eyes, and I hated it from start to finish. Checkpoints are another problem for me. In Absolution, you can no longer save on demand. Instead, you have to find these spots on the floor to create a checkpoint. Not the best system in my opinion, as I found myself hardly using them and just brute forcing my way through the levels, because I rarely found any. So a change that just wasn't necessary in the slightest for me. There is also this really weird new addition of a slow-mo power that you can use to mass delete your enemies, and in a game that really relies on you playing stealthily and giving you no other real options, this seems so out of place, and I don't think I used it a single time outside of the Force tutorial. So yeah, a really weird addition, but not necessarily a bad one, I suppose. Now, Hitman Absolution is a very mixed game, and I'll be honest with you, I do not see this in the same forgiving light as I did back when I first played it. The linearness, is that a word? Linearness? Oh well, but it absolutely kills the fun for me, and having those classic target missions sprinkled throughout just made me really upset that these were the rare commodity, as they are genuinely the best part and really fun. Now, don't get me wrong, I've dunked on this game quite a bit, but you absolutely can have fun here, and there are moments where it feels like the cleanest Hitman to date, but most of the game is spent trying to find these moments instead of the other way around. I don't think this is the worst game I've ever played on reflection. I think it is a terrible Hitman game. But if it was called something different and wasn't connected to the universe, I think I would be a lot more forgiving. But it's just a shame that IO had no confidence here, as their end product is one that I couldn't recommend personally, unless you're extremely new to the franchise. It's also worth mentioning that this was the first Hitman to have online, as contract mode was introduced here. And the concept is actually pretty neat. Go into a random level and make your own custom contract, for then the other players of the world to try and beat. I remembered playing this when it came out, and it was easily the most fun part of the entire game. Unfortunately though, with Square Enix parting ways with the Hitman series, this mode is now unplayable, so I can't even really talk about it for the video, which is a real shame, because it definitely would have been in Absolution's favour, but as I said, it's currently unplayable. So it'll come as a surprise to nobody that Hitman Absolution is the bottom of the ranks now. Now, don't get me wrong, it isn't the worst game I've ever played, and I don't want to hate on it unnecessarily, but the Hitman experience that it offers just isn't anywhere near as good to me as any of the other titles that we've played so far. And a word of advice, if you want to play this yourselves, pretend this isn't a Hitman game, and I guarantee you'll have a better time with it, as I probably will be giving this game another go at some point, and I'll look at it in a different mindset, so we'll see. But for this, I have to rank it as a Hitman game. So it was time for IO to get back to the drawing board. Absolution didn't go down as well as they'd hoped, but now had the confidence to give the fans what they wanted and to trust the formula that put them on the board. But before we get to the next mainline entry, we first need to discuss a couple of mobile games that came first. So whilst IO were figuring out what was next for the mainline entry, first we got the highly unexpected Hitman GO. Originally brought out for mobiles, this sees you take on assassinating your targets in a completely new way. Now, the Hitman style has been adapted into a sort of board game layout, where you are tasked with either making it to the exit of the board or to the target, whichever comes first. And on the surface, you may be asking, how is this really a Hitman game? And yes, even though the playstyle is horrendously different to anything else that came before, but actually it's fairly true and loyal to the originals, and you can see that from pretty much the moment you begin playing. To start with, the action figure-y design and board game aesthetic look fantastic to me. Now, the basic premise of gameplay is also really simple. I mean, it has to be for a mobile game originally, but the idea is that when you move, so do the enemies on the board, and if you get unlucky enough to be caught in the enemy's way, you are dead and have to start the level over. Now, you can take out your enemies, of course, by attacking them from the side or behind, and there's also quite a lot of neat tricks that keep the levels fresh, even after many hours into the game. There are secret hatches, tunnels, rock power-ups to distract enemies. Sometimes you'll have to go out of your way to find 47's briefcase that can sometimes appear, and the list goes on. Now, also, don't be fooled. This game, or at least to my stupid wrinkle-free brain, can also be quite challenging, and it took a lot more concentration to beat the levels than I first assumed it would. There are so many variables to look for on the board, and it is very easy to get lost and accidentally enter yourself into a tricky, unwinnable situation. And that's not including completing the 3 challenges challenges that you have to clear in order to unlock levels later on. These challenges can range from killing nobody, killing everybody, or completing the level in a certain amount of moves, which also adds another degree of challenge and keeps it interesting. Another thing that I absolutely loved about this game was the fact that you can replay certain infamous levels within the Hitman universe, so it was also very enjoyable to get to one of these stages and to play it in a bizarre light that I wouldn't have expected. Now, honestly, there isn't much more to say about Hitman GO. It's well worth playing even if it's just for an hour or so, and I can definitely say that it's fun, thought out, and with a great polish. This isn't going to give you the insane Hitman vibes from before, but you can't expect it to. It's just a fun take on the series with love, and it holds up better than you might imagine. Now, I'm not going to be adding this to the rankings list because even though it's technically a Hitman game, there's no point making it compete with the others, as it's just not that kind of experience, and wouldn't be fair to hold it up against the rest that came before. With that, let's move on to the next side project that they released in the meantime. So the next is another mobile game, this time Hitman Sniper, and the premise of the game? Well, it's quite obvious really, but just in case, this game is essentially like the Hitman Absolution prologue. You've got a sniper, and you have targets to kill. Go. But again, there's a little more here than you might expect from a mobile game. Firstly, playing this is actually surprisingly smooth. The sniper controls well, and pulling off the shots you intend is just as easy as you'd imagine. But there is also more to the levels than to just shoot somebody. Every new contract has a certain parameter that you must complete before the main target is revealed. That could be killing a certain amount of moving bodyguards, scoring a certain amount of points, or getting an amount of headshots, and this was already more gameplay than I was expecting. Now, the game doesn't have the most incredible playtime, and like me, I imagine the novelty will wear off about an hour in, but that doesn't stop that hour from being really enjoyable, where you have to plan well and hit your shots. There honestly isn't too much more to discuss about this really, other than the stupid prices for the sniper rifles that you can buy. Over £40 for a single rifle. God, I'd be curious to see how many people bought these. But anyway, my point is, you get what you expect with this game. It's not going to wow you or keep you hooked for hours, but it doesn't stop it from being another loyal and enjoyable venture back into the universe. The same with Go, this isn't going to be added to the leaderboards either, because it just wouldn't be fair in the slightest. But without further ado, the waiting is over, and finally the new vision of Hitman was ready to be released. But was it worth the wait, especially after Absolution? Oh yeah, it was worth every second. 2016 saw the new dawn of the Hitman franchise. IO spent the last 4 years perfectly crafting the next Hitman experience, and what they created here would become the foundation for everything else moving forward. So let's waste no time and just get straight into it. This title sets up the next trilogy wonderfully, although we have had similar stories before in the series. The contracts at first feel random, fun adventures, but throughout the campaign, once again, things are more connected than they once appeared, as all of the hits seem to be linked to a secret organization called Providence, and a shadow client hell-bent on burning it down to the ground. It's also worth noting that the new cutscene that set up the story and every level look incredible, and do their job well. Simple in premise, but over the next couple of titles, things connect very well in my opinion. However, here, it's just the beginning, getting to know the characters and the strings that they pull. But what about the actual game itself? Well, gone are the linear missions, as Hitman now offers 6 incredible locations where the contracts take place. Once you're dropped into the world, it's now once again up to you to figure out the best method of attack to take care of your targets. And this is the first thing that really shocked me when playing this. It was just the sheer size and scope of the maps. Here it truly feels like a sandbox where you get to craft your own experience and figure your own way to do things and take care of the competition, whether that be from the insane amount of ways you can take them out, accidents of course returning and the best they've ever been. Listing the ways you can kill your opponents in this game would genuinely take me hours, as each target has a plethora of hilarious and unique kills. But accidents aside, 47 now has the most incredible arsenal that can all be used in ridiculously satisfying ways, even if that way is just finding the right moment to shoot them in the head. Every single fibre of this game feels rewarding to work your way through, and the more challenge you put on yourself, the better it feels when you finally pull off an amazing kill and get away clean and unseen. But on a mechanic standpoint, a lot of things have changed, and it's clear that IO went through all all of the previous Hitman titles to find the mechanics that work best, and implemented them all in ways that make sense. Firstly, the disguise system. It has been overhauled again, but they definitely took the Absolution foundation and actually made it good. Now when you don a disguise, for the most part, nobody will really be able to see through it unless you do something obvious. But Hitman now includes a new class of enemy, the Enforcers. These are set characters that can get suspicious by seeing 47 in particular outfits. This is honestly the perfect disguise system to me, as for the most part they are very useful and will allow you to do what you need to do. However, you still have to be careful of your pathing. A phenomenal update to me, and something I wish that they would retroactively patch to Absolution, but that's definitely just wishful thinking. Speaking of Absolution, Instinct also returns, and again it has been fine-tuned quite a bit, and now only serves really to give 47 recon throughout the game. You now can't deplete it as Instinct is everlasting, but now it highlights your targets all the time, as well as highlighting objects 47 can use, whether that be quest items or weapons, and again this is perfect implementation, and I have zero complaints about it now. There are some other mechanics that have been tweaked and polished as well. Firstly, combat works pretty much the same as before, but once again has just been refined and updated to make sure it's as smooth as possible for the moments that you need it the most, and this is for both hand-to-hand and weapon-related combat. I think one of the most iconic and well-known aspects of the new Hitman games though is the throwing ability. Now pretty much anything 47 can get his hands on can now be used as a weapon to either knock out or kill NPCs in your way, and trust me folks, there is nothing more hilarious to me in this game than fully launching an apricot on an enemy's head and watching him flop to the floor. Genuinely so much fun. A completely new addition this time around though are the opportunity story missions. Now when you're roaming and exploring the location, you might be able to overhear NPCs or find intel that unlocks an opportunity. If you follow the list of requirements it gives you, it will end in a brilliant way to kill your opponent, and each mission has plenty. Another fine addition for people who would prefer a touch more hand-holding to see what the games are truly capable of. Blood Money's rating system also returns, as well as the new system of level mastery. Now each mission has an insane collection of challenges ranging from kill methods, things to discover, story beats, and oh god, so much more that I can't stress. And the more of these challenges you complete on your playthroughs, the more you unlock, whether that be new starting points on the map, new weapons for your roster, or something else entirely. Hitman has never been as replayable as it is now, and you are heavily rewarded for truly squeezing as much as you can out of each level, and perfectly mastering each location. On that, I actually need to talk about the locations. So as I said before, they are the biggest open sandbox stages that the series have ever had, but that's not all. One of the biggest things for me is how populated each mission is, especially in locations like Paris or Marrakesh. It feels amazing to walk amongst hundreds of people to get to the target that you need, as it feels like more eyes are on you than ever before, so each move needs careful planning, and I absolutely adored that. It's obvious and also worth saying though that every map looks unbelievably good as well. Whenever I moved on to a new mission, I found myself always taking in the sights before anything else, and being genuinely shocked by how beautiful every stage is. Like, it's genuinely breathtaking, and I think my favourite of this game would be Hokkaido. Not only is it the hardest mission in the game, which, I mean, I love a challenge, but every time you turn the camera there is just something beautiful in front of you. So again, credit to everybody involved in the level design. They look the best they ever had, and they absolutely play their best as well. Now honestly folks, there isn't too much more to discuss here about the base experience. Hitman truly mastered the formula in my eyes, and I can't see it getting much better than this. And I can only really say that this game has a single very tiny negative as well: the voice acting. Now actually not the voice acting, as the voice acting itself is absolutely fine, but you can tell that they had a shortage of actors, as you hear the same voices in every single location, like the Steve Blum problem of Absolution, but here it's Spider-Man instead. It's not necessarily the worst thing, but it is very noticeable, which I do think breaks the immersion ever so slightly. It's also worth noting that on release, Hitman was an episodic game, with only Paris and the tutorial levels available on launch, but with the new levels added roughly every month. Now I can't really speak on this to be honest, as after Absolution I was a bit hesitant to try it, and it was only until all of the content had already released did I first pick this up. So again, I can't really talk about this as it was the only Hitman to do so. So if you folks will let me know in the comments if the episodic thing was a good or a bad thing, because I can see pros and cons to both. Other than that, there are a couple of new game modes as well. Firstly, Contracts has returned from Absolution, giving each mission an unlimited amount of replayability, with an infinite amount of challenges that can be set by any player multiplayer in the world. Another phenomenal addition, and I'm so glad that they brought it back. They also added something called elusive targets, which are a one-time specialized contract normally involving a celebrity. For these targets, you have a single opportunity to kill them. If you mess up and fail, it's over and they escape forever. And again, unfortunately, I can't talk about these contracts as I have never played one, and it kinda sucks that they put so much effort into a brand new collection of contracts involving celebrities that I can never play, but I also slightly understand the appeal, I suppose. With the release of Hitman, the series had finally raised the bar again, and this was the new standard going forward. This title is absolutely phenomenal, and I can't sing its praises enough. This truly is the definitive Hitman experience, and it's not even close. So again, I don't think this is going to be a shock to anybody when I put Hitman right at the top of the list. It is absolutely a masterpiece through and through, and for me, the definitive Hitman experience. If you want to play a Hitman game and get the real true feeling that you are making those locations your own and planning out stuff accordingly, then Hitman's the game for you. So with its renowned success, Hitman breathed new life, and it didn't take IO long to work on a sequel. Only this time, they abandoned the episodic release, and 2 years later, we would receive the next installment promising to have refined things even further, and it being another edition that fans would go crazy for. Now, honestly, for the next two entries, there's going to be slightly less to talk about, as the formula is pretty much identical to what came before. Big sprawling missions that 47 has to master with so many opportunities in each. They found the formula that worked, so they didn't need any big changes or drastic improvements. At the end of the day, why fix something that isn't broken in the slightest? But instead, here they refined what they gave us last time, hoping that it's a better experience than before. The story continues its path told from the previous game, with 47 and Diana finding more about Providence and the Shadow Client. But this game also makes a decent effort into explaining more about 47's past and history here, which I really enjoyed, as throughout the entire series we hardly know anything about 47. But here we get tiny pieces on what he once was, but not enough to give the game away, which I really enjoyed. It's also worth noting that the cinematic intros have been replaced with comic-style single images that convey the story well, but this is actually still really impressive, as during the development Square Enix separated from IO and things kind of went to hell behind the scenes, so this being the only obvious change was incredibly impressive. So let's just cut straight to the maps, and again it's just more incredible work that is a joy to explore and work our way through. But it's also worth noting that Hitman II has one of my favourite maps of all time with the Isle of Scale. God, I hope that's how you pronounce it. And this mission for me is the highlight of the entire game, but it's pretty much impossible to feel underwhelmed by any of the maps in this title. Now, even though the formula this time around is pretty much identical to what came before, there are some tweaks and some new additions that I think are worth mentioning. Firstly, the picture-in-picture mechanic from Blood Money Returns, making sure that you see the vital moments in the contracts, from which body specifically has been found by NPCs, or another angle on your kill of choice. It's just another addition that makes sense and does nothing but help the overall experience. The inventory wheel has had slight tweaks to it, making sure you can still see the world in the menu, and the issue with the voice actors from the last game has been fixed with varied actors who all know their onions. Agent 47 is now able to hide himself in tall grass and such that he sees around the map, as just another method of staying hidden, and in fact people enjoyed this change so much that they retroactively added it to the previous title as well, which I think is a nice touch. Oh, and a really surprising new mechanic is that NPCs can now see reflections in the mirror, so if you're trying to sneak behind somebody who's checking themselves out, they will see you, which I think is just a great idea even if it hardly ever happens in the game itself. Lovely attention to detail, which just proves that the devs are great. Now, for brand new additions to the game, we get that with two new game modes. Firstly, Sniper returns and sees you take care of more contracts, but this time from a safe distance. These are absolutely fine in my opinion. Definitely not what you'd pick the game up for, but another fun addition to mix up the violence a touch, and this could also be played cooperatively with a partner. Or could, should I say, as I don't think the multiplayer is an option here anymore, which is a shame. Ghosts mode was also the newest addition, and its first true trek into the the same time co-op experience. Ghost Mode sees you and a rival hitmanner take on the same contracts at the same time. However, you can see each other's progress and any actions that you take do not interfere with your opponents. The idea is that you both get tasked with killing random targets and it's the first of 5. A great experience, and I remember playing the hell out of this when it first came out. Unfortunately again though, this is another game mode that just simply isn't playable anymore, and it isn't even listed in the game, which I really think is another shame. Now this may have seemed like a quick rundown, but genuinely that is it. I don't think there is anything else for me to really talk about other than readdressing points that I already mentioned in the previous game, or saying more about how I find every level being absolutely stunning. As I said, it's more of the same perfect hitmanning that came before, and again it's worked for IO's favour, as everybody went nuts for this, and was already screaming for the final chapter. Now for me personally, even with the little tweaks and the quality of life changes that Hitman 2 offered, I still think I would play the first over it, as I just enjoyed the maps, the missions and the targets a lot more in the first game than this one. This is not a bad game in the slightest, which is why it's going to be going into the number 2 spot, as I still would play 2016 Hitman over this one if I had to make a choice. With another renowned success for IO, people were waiting patiently for the final chapter of Hitman, and only a few years later, it arrived. Finally, we have arrived at the end of our Hitman journey, as in 2021 Hitman 3 released and was the final chapter of this new trilogy. And again folks, it's going to be hard to talk about this for too long, as they stayed true to their previous versions and just gave the fans more of what they wanted. But again, we do get some more tweaks and additions here as well. Let's begin with the story, and the story here arrives at a very satisfying conclusion in my eyes, and ties pretty much everything that came before into a neat little package, so that's already a win. But here they also introduce some detective spy thriller cinematics to start every mission, and my god, I drank these like the nectar they are. I absolutely loved the visual style of these, and personally I think they're my favourite cinematics throughout the entire experience. My god, they're gorgeous. Oh, and speaking of gorgeous, I don't know how they did it, but the locations and the level design here are also again the best they have ever been. This game in my eyes doesn't have a single bad map, and in fact a lot of my favourite missions of all time are in this game. The nightclub in Berlin, the beautiful streets of China, and the Dartmoor mansion are just a few of the incredible locations here. To me, easily the best levels yet on both design and playability. They absolutely aced them. And I actually need to talk about Dartmoor as a great example of how much effort IO put into this game. With the Dartmoor mission, there is an entire murder mystery subplot where you take the disguise of a detective and have to slowly piece together who in the house is guilty of murder. And this goes in so many fantastic ways. Now, I'm not going to spoil who it is, but trust me, Dartmoor is a highlight of this game, and this mission is so much fun to go through. In terms of tweaks and additions to the new mechanics though, we don't have too much. But firstly, we have shortcuts, which are new unlockable routes that can make the journey easier for 47 when replaying levels. But personally to me, they don't really add too much, and some of them are also insanely difficult to get to, but it's definitely not a bad addition. The next is the camera that is constantly in your inventory now. Throughout the levels, Agent 47 now has the ability to hack certain parts of the map, either to gain access or to download intel and such like that. A fine addition, but again, nobody's going to be screaming about it either. Oh, and another feature that they implemented is that you input codes manually now, which is, yeah, fine I guess. Other than that, there really isn't anything to mention from a gameplay standpoint, as it's just more perfection that came before. A couple of years after the release, however, Hitman got a huge update, and an entire new game mode with Freelancer, which turns 47's adventures into a roguelike, which is something I didn't know I needed until it was released. Now in Freelancer, you are given a collection of missions that you must do with zero help from the ICA, and with it being a roguelike, every time you get something different. So this truly is where you come to prove how good a hitman you are, as it can be very unforgiving. But in that lies the reward, as completing the freelance missions gave me at least such an incredible feeling. So another great addition as well. Other than that folks, that is pretty much all I can talk about really. Again, it is just more of a return to form than before, and personally, this is my favourite Hitman of all time. Every mission is perfect, the gameplay is as smooth as anything, and I would have no hesitation telling people to play this game. So folks, we have finally arrived at the end, and Hitman 3 will be taking that #1 spot. This, without question, is my favourite Hitman game, and the one that just absolutely nails everything. It has the best locations, it has has the best targets. It has the best things to do whilst you're doing the other two things. Hitman 3 is absolute perfection to me. Now, it does feel a little weird to me having the new trilogy in 1, 2, and 3, considering that they're all essentially the same game, but what they offer is truly the best Hitman experience. Although, to be honest, an argument could be made from every single one on the list. Every single game in this list could be number one potentially, so I really have to give credit to IO. They are phenomenal, and the games speak for themselves. Now, before we end, I do also want to address a tiny little elephant in the room, because technically there were also 2 Hitman VR titles. However, I can't play VR games in the slightest. They make me incredibly motion sick, so I didn't really want to buy a VR headset just to make myself ill in 10 minutes for the sake of being able to talk about a couple of spin-off titles. So I know it's not ideal, but I really hope you understand why I haven't included the VR games. They just make me so ill. But there we go, folks. Thank you all so much for watching. I personally cannot wait to see what else we get from IO. I know they're currently working on a James Bond game, which could be an absolutely phenomenal thing, and I'm gonna go feral for it on launch. But we don't know when that's coming, so we're just gonna have to wait to see what's next from this incredible company. But more importantly, thank you all so much for watching. I know this has been a horrendously long vid, so if you have watched to the end, I really appreciate it more than you could know. And again, if you haven't done so already, I really would appreciate you liking, subscribing, and turning on that bell if you haven't done so. But not only that, please also to make sure you leave a comment saying what series you want me to cover next. As soon there will be a poll on my YouTube where you folks will get to decide based on the top comments of the last couple of videos. So with some insane options coming up soon, I think it would only be fair for you to have your say as well. And for some reason, if me talking about Hitman for over an hour wasn't enough for you, then please make sure you go to check my Mortal Kombat video as well, where again we play every single one in this series. If you enjoyed this one, I'm hopeful that you should enjoy that one just as much. But once again, that is it, folks. I have already talked for far too long today. Thank you all so much again for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I already cannot wait to see you in the next video. So until then, folks, have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.